before. We were talking about male privilege. And I came in with the hot take that I don't believe in.
Only female privilege exists for you.
Pretty much.
Okay.
Pretty much. But no, I mean, I think when you look at privilege, and this is maybe an interesting take, I think you need to look at the totality of somebody's circumstances to establish if they genuinely have privileges, because like a male, like I would argue upon birth, men, like what male privilege do men have? I mean, they have their genitals mutilated upon birth. That doesn't strike me as a privilege. So
depends on so for instance, if you want to be a leader and you want to be like in politics, or you want to hold any of these high powered leadership positions, those are usually occupied by men. And there are
a very small proportion of men. It's an apex fallacy.
Well, yeah, I understand that there isn't like every man isn't up there, but if that's what you want to do, so it depends what we're talking about. I also think there's plenty of areas where men are falling behind or men are struggling.
Sure.
But it goes both ways. So there, for instance, you talk about it all the time. Men can be more promiscuous. That's a double standard, and women get shamed for it. Women sex workers get shamed more than male sex workers. I mean, pick your issue and it can go one way or the other. And we all have privilege. All of us that are sitting here, all of you that are watching, that have internet, that have food, you guys all have privilege. Privileges can come in so many forms.
But go ahead, Lauren.
Sorry, I was just going to say that I think you guys are both right, where there's no such thing as being able to look at someone, their immutable characteristics, and say, I know you have more or less privilege than me. It really depends on the situation. In some circumstances, it might be more beneficial to be a female or a male. But I would say if we're talking just in terms of the legal system purely, I would say that females tend to have more privileges because of things like you just mentioned, diversity hiring when it comes to being a pilot. I can't think of, any law that currently exists where it's like, oh, you're a man, you're more likely to get in. We're going to put your resume to the top just because of that, where I can think of many circumstances when that does apply to being a female.
So I would agree that there should be a push, like we've pushed for women to get into STEM jobs. One of the things I'm a big proponent of is pushing men to get into more what like Reeves calls HEAL jobs: health, education, administration, literacy. So I agree with you that there should be a push. But the reason that hasn't been the case is because historically for a long time we've had a social system where men held the majority of the social, political, and economic power. So in some ways, like with education, we are outpacing men by a lot. Yeah. So we've kind of not only narrowed the gap, we've reversed it, but it depends on the issue.
I agree with her. I was going to say an example of male privilege would be like in the flight industry. Initially, men were more...
They're seen as more competent.
There were a lot more men more in that industry. That's what I'm trying to say. But it's also the factors that men were taking more risks to be in that industry, like initially, which is what...
I mean, there's like a whole part of the manosphere that literally constantly uses the example, like, if your plane was crashing, do you want a male pilot or a female pilot? Like, basically insinuating that female pilots are not as competent as males.
And I think
that societal stereotype is an example of male privilege. People assuming that because you're a woman, you're not as competent of a pilot as a man.
But it's male privilege that, a type of so-called male privilege that has only arisen because females are getting jobs that they might otherwise not get. So it's, I see what you're saying. If you are currently a pilot, you're going to be assumed to be more competent if you're a man because you are not a diversity hire.
Right. I don't think that's the only reason. People have always thought women were worse drivers, so they think if she's a bad driver on the road, then she's probably a bad driver as a pilot. I don't think it's just because everybody assumes you're a diversity hire. I think people genuinely think women can't drive or women have worse spatial reasoning.
I mean, that is true in average, though, that we have worse spatial reasoning.
Yeah, but to use an average and to stereotype an individual,
you're right, that's not the same,
is the problem, right? So yes, on average, men maybe are more likely to be an engineer. But if I look at you and be like, she's definitely not an engineer because men on average are more likely to be an engineer, that would be a stupid way to think.
You wanted to come in?
Well, I was going to say, there definitely is an underlying issue. But I think diversity hires make it worse for women in many industries, not just aviation. And then also to your point about women just naturally being worse spatial reasoners, I actually work in the cognitive geography lab at UCSB, and I can tell you that that's not entirely true. There are a lot of exceptions to that, and it's really more based on the individual for each person's spatial abilities and cognition.
I mean, that's not entirely true, like in aggregate, because that's, I guess, the psychometric testing usually shows that men tend to do better. Not that it's like every man is
there's
better
actually a
than
big
every woman.
overlap, I think, with that. So yeah, you're right on average, but there is a big overlap. There's
Yeah,
more
of
intragroup
course.
variation than intergroup variation on that.
Did you have more or?
No, I mean, I wouldn't deny that. It's just that there are the average differences, whether that's even with IQ, right? Men and women have same average IQ, but the variation among men is greater, which is why you have more men at the tail ends, right? You have more male geniuses and you have more male, I mean, the gentlest way to say it is people who perhaps do not excel academically. But on average, we are the same. I could easily see that being the same with spatial
Matthew
intelligence.
Sorry,
McCarthy
hold on.
donated $99. What up, Bree? Glad you're well. Sorry
Thank you,
my
man.
booballa was late. The storm was much worse in LA. Baby looking hotter than ever. To counter Mrs. Chen earlier, of Empowers Women, my booballa is her own boss and only makes content she's comfy with on her own terms.
Yeah. That's very true.
Your boyfriend calls you Boobalala?
And thank you. I'm Boobala, he's Boobaloo.
Does-
Yeah.
That's your boyfriend?
my fiance.
I was
okay.
so
Yeah.
lost that entire
was-
time.
I didn't get that.
Gotta give us some context.
Okay. Well, and you brought up this this talking point that about in a catastrophic flight scenario how certain people would prefer a male pilot over a female pilot.
This is a manosphere talking point. I mean, didn't Andrew Tate famously say this? And
Andrew Tate did say it, but I
yeah.
think he added, I think you're omitting the other portion of that, and he said, well, there are certain things that I think women are better at than men are.
Sure,
For
but
example,
that-
like childcare related things.
Yeah, this is exactly my point. So I'm saying it cuts both ways. These gender stereotypes cut both ways. So
Is there a biological basis for these stereotypes?
like I said, there may be some biological basis, but to believe that culture and socialization doesn't make an impact also is
You don't think there's like a innate temperament?
there may be a slight, like on average, maybe yes, but there's also socialization and culture, which is why you see men and women behave differently in different cultures. So in like Western culture, we're a little more egalitarian, but if you look at the East, countries that are more in poverty, more war stricken, those countries, there are more rigid gender roles still. So to believe that culture and socialization have no impact is just stupid, right? We're not all it's not all
I don't think
biological.
anybody's making that argument though, that there's no societal impact on people.
Well, when you're saying that, it's just innate that women are worse as
No,
pilots.
I didn't say that.
You're saying they said that. I'm saying that that's an example of them using gender stereotypes, and that's fueling gender equality because they're saying, I would rather have a male pilot because women are not as good at driving. Well, a lot of pilots, if you're a female and you're going to be a pilot, you're probably actually just as good at driving as men. You're not looking at everybody. You're looking at the women who chose to be pilots. So I don't think I don't have a gender preference if my plane is clashing on who's.
I have a question for you, and I know you wanted to come in. I mean, is there training as a pilot, do you get trained for stress management in like catastrophic situations?
Absolutely, you do. And as a flight instructor, part of what I'm responsible for teaching people is aeronautical decision making, learning about hazardous attitudes and how to mitigate them and how to process and manage different stressful situations. We also do lots of in-flight actual training, simulated engine failures, simulated engine fires, all kinds of different stuff. And I think the basis of saying, women are just worse pilots naturally, and I would want a male if the plane was crashing, I think that really just stems from ignorance. Like, they don't understand that the aviation industry at this point is so standardized that everyone is taking the exact same exams, and it's very unbiased. If your skills and your knowledge isn't up to par, that's going to be called out, and that's what makes aviation overall, especially airlines, so safe at this point in time.
Look, I don't know what the truth is, but couldn't you argue that in stressful situations that temperamentally, generally speaking, men do have some sort of better stress resilience?
No, because I think there are a ton of women. Like I said, it could be
Sure,
true on average
sure.
that are better than men in those situations. So to ever look at a person and use broad generalizations to be like, you're a woman, therefore you have this temperament, that indicates a lack of critical thinking. in my opinion. That's just you being like, okay, I'm going to put you in this category, I'm going to put you in this category, I'm going to put you in this category, especially in areas like this where there's so much overlap. It's false. Like she just said, they have a standardized test to get in. She has to do the same thing every other man has to do in order to be a pilot.